Hi, and welcome to Freedom Fighters Code Gray. This is a show where we discuss human trafficking, an issue that's happening in our community. Now, some of the content in the show may be triggering for viewers, as we will be dealing with subject matter related to sexual exploitation, youth homelessness, and sex trafficking. If you're in need of information and support as it relates to human trafficking, please call the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-833-900-1010. Youth homelessness is an issue that's happening right now in Simcoe County. What is the nexus between trafficking and situations of youth homelessness? We know, for example, that youth homelessness is a risk factor to experiencing sex trafficking in Ontario and in Simcoe County as well. So today I am joined by Laura Burke, who is the Director of Counselling at Youth Haven, who is going to be joining me for this discussion. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks so much for being here today. Just to start off with, I was wondering if you could share a bit about Youth Haven, like what is this service and what supports are you offering the community?
Sure, so Youth Haven is an emergency youth shelter based out of Barrie. We work with youth throughout all surrounding communities, ages 16 to 24. Currently we have 19 beds in shelter. We also have a transitional program that's also based out of Barrie, which offers just support to youth who are at risk for longer term period and just working with them to teach them life skills and to transition out to being on their own. So we have 15 beds at our transitional program, and we also have an outreach counseling program, which we have satellite offices throughout Simcoe County. We have offices in Barrie, Midland, Orillia, and South Simcoe. And our outreach program specifically offers counseling and support services to the same age group, 16 to 24, of youth throughout the county. We do all sorts of different things. We help support with mental health, addictions, just anything really like anger management, whatever a youth kind of comes to us in need of. That's what we help support them with. We also do a lot of work with families and caregivers throughout the community who may be struggling with their youth at home. And we provide advocacy and just lots of different types of supports.
So it sounds like you and your team are very busy. You are offering so many valuable resources and services to the community. Now, some folks who are tuning into the show today may have heard the words at the beginning of the show, youth homelessness, and maybe have not heard those words put together before. So could you just take some time to explain what exactly is youth homelessness and what does that look like in Simcoe County?
Sure. So homelessness for youth specifically can look very different than what people might think. A lot of the times, when you think of homelessness, it's, sleeping and living out on the streets. And while that certainly is an aspect of it, for youth, we find that a lot of times it looks like, couch surfing, just not having a good home to be in, just due to different types of conflict within the home. A lot of times they're staying with friends and kind of bouncing around from place to place and stuff like that. Inconsistent housing, not having the means to have reliable or to remain in housing successfully for various reasons. So it's a lot of different, it's not just the being on the street portion of it. There's a lot of different ways it can look.
Thanks for explaining that, because I feel like when we sometimes hear the words, someone experiencing homelessness, there are these preconceived notions of what that can look like. But for you just to help explain that it could be couch surfing, it could be, not having a stable place to live or call home. Those are all potential situations where someone maybe has like a precarious living environment. What are some of the factors that may lead an individual in Simcoe County to experience youth homelessness?
I think, that there's so many different things that can attribute to this. I think what we see a lot of increasingly is, the kind of the challenges within the mental health mental health, on a mental health level. Like, I think there is a lot of need for that. I think mental health is in a crisis of its own right now. So just not having the proper and adequate resources within our society to provide support to, you know, youth who are experiencing a decline in their mental health. And, you know, there are a lot of supports out there, but there's also a lot of wait times and a lot of limitations surrounding that. So I think oftentimes what we see is the conflicts at home that are happening with youth, and just parents not having the ability to be able to provide those supports for their youth. And then, you know, things escalate. A lot of times, you know, adults are struggling, parents are struggling with their own mental health as well. So I think that's like definitely one of the biggest ways that people are not able to navigate in the best way, and that results in, you know, family breakdown and youth kind of ending up, whether it's in the shelter system or on the street or couch surfing or with friends and stuff like that. I think, you know, obviously we're all kind of experiencing, you know, the effects of inflation. There is not enough, you know, housing out there, affordable housing for folks. So that is definitely a challenge for a lot of people. And just, again, just not having adequate resources to help support individuals through tough times in general.
You highlighted that mental health is potentially one of the biggest push factors, if you will, that could lead a youth to experience homelessness. What is the importance of providing mental health supports for youth in our community in order to prevent situations like homelessness from occurring? Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, it's incredibly important to help. I think there's just such a lack of available resources in a timely manner to address the issues that are going on. We also have issues, you know, when we talk about mental health, that includes addiction as well. So just the level of increase in addiction among youth and overdoses, and, you know, they're turning to things like drugs to help them cope with their mental health or their traumas that they've experienced, right? Because when we look at addiction, that is a major reason why people turn to substances to try to cope, and that ties perfectly in with the mental health system as well, just the lack of resources and supports for people out there. But I think it's important, the work needs to be done to help a youth regulate their emotions, because with that, like, it comes, you know, effective communication and all those other healthy things, to work out family conflicts and things like that as well, right? So I think there's just such a need for helping them realize, whether they're diagnosed or not, just working closely with them to help them understand what they're experiencing and give them practical resources to help cope with those mental health issues.
That's great. Just outlining the need for really just like wraparound supports for both youth in our community, but also their families to help with conflict resolution and communication development in order to prevent youth homelessness from occurring in the first place. What would you say is important for the general public to know, who they might not know anything about youth homelessness? Like, what do you think are some of the key issues around this topic, or things in general that you think are maybe myths that need to be combated, that people listening right now absolutely need to know?
I think it's just, you know, important to be aware that it certainly is happening, and it certainly is happening at an increased rate. I think as a community, just, you know, really working on normalizing people being comfortable with talking about their mental health and reaching out for those resources, you know, detaching from any stigma that's associated with that. We all have mental health at the end of the day, and it's not something that, you know, people should be shamed for or looked down upon for. So just having that more accepting outlook, and, you know, just creating as much of a safe space for people as possible. You know, having patience with the system sometimes, because that's certainly required, and just knowing that there is help out there. And just, I think education is a big piece of that as well, knowing what the resources are, and where you can refer yourself or others to, because there is help out there.
Thanks for highlighting both of those things, that, yeah, knowing that there is help available for folks in the community who are listening and maybe struggling with a mental health challenge of some sort, but also the importance of kind of breaking down the stigma and assumptions people have about mental health, to understand that we need to be compassionate and also advocate for resources to be able to help one another out in our community. Now, this show is focused on human trafficking, and so I would love if we could just spend some time chatting a bit about the connection between youth homelessness and trafficking. Like, from your experience working at Youth Haven and also your team's knowledge on this topic, how are these two things related? How do they interconnect?
So I think, again, as I said, like with the homelessness piece, I think it's important to acknowledge that human trafficking is a very real thing that is happening in our community. I think oftentimes, we're very privileged to live in a community, as we do in Simcoe County. And it's, when we talk about human trafficking, like, people are often shocked to hear that it's a very big problem here. Obviously, people are, for youth specifically who are experiencing homelessness, it just puts that extra vulnerability on them. I think there's a vulnerability when it comes to youth in general, just because of, they're still growing up, they're still learning, there's so much going on cognitively and all that sort of thing. But when you add on the extra layers that come along with homelessness, it puts them at that, vulnerable situation where, they don't have a steady home to be in. They don't, they may be likely struggling with mental health and all that sort of thing. So that just adds on so many different layers. Unfortunately, traffickers are aware of how to prey on more vulnerable individuals. So I think when it comes to homelessness, it's an easier target for traffickers to approach young in that sort of vulnerable situation.
When you say that traffickers, are approaching these youth who are in these vulnerable situations, what kind of tactics are they using or doing to potentially lure a youth into a situation of exploitation? So
a lot of times it's just, painting a picture of how much better your life can be, right? And just making those promises and, what's called grooming. So just getting to know someone, playing on their vulnerabilities, promising that, they can help get them into a better financial situation, like just making all those promises and, luring young people into those situations. They know what they're doing. Traffickers know what they're doing. They know how to study people, and they know which ones are more vulnerable. It's very unfortunate. I think, there's been a lot of work that's being done around this issue. And I think, just during my time with Youth Haven as well, I've definitely seen a high increase in people becoming more aware, and police services working with community partners in order to target the vulnerable people that we need to educate regarding this matter, so that we can try and keep people as safe as possible when it comes to this.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge on this topic. We will be right back after we take a short break to continue this discussion on youth homelessness and human trafficking in Simcoe County. And welcome back to Freedom Fighters Code Gray. This is a show where we discuss human trafficking, a prevalent issue in Simcoe County. In today's episode, we're talking about how youth homelessness and sex trafficking are interconnected. And I'm joined by Laura Burke, who's the Director of Counselling at Youth Haven. Laura, thanks so much for being here. And I'm just wondering, as we start this segment of the show, if you could talk about, again, but maybe a little bit differently, how are these two topics interconnected? How are youth homelessness and sex trafficking related?
Yeah, I think, homeless youth are certainly at a higher level of vulnerability, just based on their current circumstances of, being homeless, being financially insecure, and things like that. So I think traffickers know kind of what they're looking for when it comes to vulnerability, and they know how to play on people's vulnerabilities. So youth are particularly at risk just because of those variables that they're experiencing. And, you know, when they're being promised, you know, a better life and a better situation and, you know, financial safety and things like that, it just puts them at more at risk.
I can see how if you were potentially in a situation where you didn't have a roof over your head and you're potentially struggling with, you know, food scarcity or other things, and someone is promising you, let's build a life together, we can move to this place, or life will be so great like this, and really lies and false promises that are being offered to someone. How challenging that would be to discern if that offer is out of, you know, friendship and kindness, because we know often traffickers are posing as boyfriends or romantic partners or as peers and friends, right? And so it's very complex. So I appreciate you highlighting how just traffickers are really identifying those vulnerabilities in youth in our community and then preying upon them. So what can be done to prevent that from happening? Like, how do we prevent our youth who are experiencing homelessness or maybe at risk of experiencing homelessness from then being potentially trafficked for sex in our community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, over the years, I think the realization that this is a very real problem throughout Simcoe County has become far more prevalent. I think people are starting to acknowledge that something needs to be done about this. So not only in our shelter systems, but as well in our local high schools and even elementary schools, because unfortunately it is a problem that does target, you know, youth of you know, young ages as well. I think education would be one of the biggest pieces to all of this. So just continuing to educate our youth throughout Simcoe County, and not only our youth, but as well as parents and, you know, teachers, hospital staff, like, because it can look so different. So just, you know, educating people on signs to look for, creating that awareness within our society for youth to even be able to recognize what that might look for. If, you know, perhaps a friend has a new partner and, you know, starts just having different behaviors and, you know, participating in things they normally wouldn't. There's just so many different signs. So I think the education piece is huge. You know, I know one of the projects throughout Simcoe County is Project Safe Horizon through the Barrie Police that we are also affiliated with, and many of the community partners. So one of the things was training hotel staff throughout Simcoe County, because it's for Simcoe, or through Barrie especially, we do have that highway stretch with hotels off of the highway at each exit. So oftentimes that's where things are happening. So just having people trained in hotels to be able to recognize, like, what, you know, if a trafficker is present or if there are, you know, people being trafficked within their hotel. The education piece is huge, yeah.
On the lines of education, you mentioned that, you know, traffickers are targeting youth of all ages, and so at the shelter, 16 to 24, right? And I remember just reading a statistic recently that was saying in Canada, the majority of trafficking cases are actually between the ages of 18 and 24, and then almost 25%, it's almost a quarter, under the age of 18. And so the work that you're really doing to engage youth at those ages is so critical, because that is really the highest population group that is being targeted and exploited by traffickers. And with the added component of youth homelessness, the services that you are providing are so valuable. So along those lines, what are some of the support services that Youth Haven is doing specifically to address this topic of sex trafficking in Simcoe County?
Right. So I think it's such a complex issue, and I think, you know, the most important thing when we're working with an individual who is being trafficked or has been trafficked is always just being respectful and meeting them where they are at. I can't remember the exact statistic, but I know that for a person who is being trafficked, the amount of times that they will leave the trafficker and return, I think it was like 8 times before they're actually able to leave for good, and that's if they're able to. So just always showing compassion and empathy, and just being supportive and non-judgmental. There's just different levels depending on where the person is at. If it's something that they want to partake in, and then we certainly practice harm reduction, like how can we make sure that this is happening in the safest possible way. So I know there's been times through the shelter where we've just created safety plans, right? So you're going to, be gone during this time period. Can you tell me maybe where you're going to be, some identifying features, when can I expect you back, and if you're not back by this time, what are the steps that we can take to make sure that we can at least connect or, ensure your safety. So just always being aware and being mindful and as supportive as possible. And just understanding like the psychology that's going on behind everything too, right? Like obviously there is a lot of trauma, there is a lot of different things, again, on a mental health level that might be happening too. I think just creating that space and engaging with community partners, and Barrie Police have been absolutely wonderful in the past in our experience when dealing with somebody who is experiencing trafficking. Coming at it with a collaborative effort as well, and knowing like if we need to get you out of Barrie, where are the safe places that you can go, working with different shelters and just trying to be as safe as possible for people.
I'm really grateful for your approach and the words that you specifically use to meet people where they're at, because each person's journey is so different. And like you said, depending on where they're at in a cycle of exploitation or re-exploitation, their needs could be very different. And so the fact that there is a service in Simcoe County like Youth Haven that is non-judgmental in approach and just open to welcoming these youth is so key. What barriers do youth who are experiencing trafficking have to exit those situations? And also, what barriers do youth who are experiencing homelessness have to being able to exit that situation as well and potentially move towards stable housing?
I think, when it comes to the trafficking question, I think there's probably the biggest barrier that I've seen in my experience is the fear, right? The fear of what's been, what they've been threatened with from their trafficker. Oftentimes there is a lot of abuse going on and a lot of really scary things for people to be able to make that decision to leave based on, are they going to hurt me? Are they going to hurt my family? And that sort of thing. So that's probably what I would say would be the biggest barrier in sense of trafficking. I think as well, our laws are still trying to play catch up when it has been very difficult to be able to lay charges, in a human trafficking situation. But I think that we've definitely come a long way. There's still a lot of work to be done on that end as well. And just being able to ensure their safety, right? Or the safety of the loved ones, because that can be a really tricky thing to do. Just like with the homelessness, it's being able to find affordable, safe housing. Like, it's just such a challenge all around that there's so many barriers to both those issues, right? And especially when they go hand in hand. And
like you highlighted, the needs are very complex for someone who has experienced this kind of trauma. And so the resources really go beyond housing to ensure that there's the mental health support component, there's the security and safety and sense of belonging that are all key components to assisting someone on their healing journey. Earlier in our conversation, you were mentioning, it's important to educate both the community, caregivers, and youth, hotel staff about the signs and indicators of trafficking. I was just wondering if you could highlight what are some of those signs and indicators that people can be looking for?
For somebody who's being trafficked?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I kind of touched on a little bit. So if it's a youth, if it's a friend that notices or family member that notices, like maybe they're more withdrawn, maybe they're more just a drastic change in behavior, being really secretive about maybe their phone or where they're going or what they're doing, that sort of thing. I think when it comes like just, looks of distress, maybe being exhausted, any symptoms of like physical pain that, maybe the way they're walking or the way they're conducting themselves that's out of the ordinary. It's tricky because a lot of the signs can also be attributed to, mental health and what they might be experiencing on that level as well. But I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot of resources out there where you can look on as well to help educate that are free. For example, helpingtraffickedpersons.org is a really good website. There's a lot of different trainings. There's youth-specific trainings as well, and anybody can do it. That's one that I've definitely liked over the years and have always recommended to people.
What would you say to someone who is tuning into the show who may be a youth in our community who is experiencing trafficking?
To somebody who knows a youth that might be experiencing, sorry?
To a youth.
To a youth.
So if a youth is, tuning into our program and they may be in a situation right now of trafficking and exploitation, like what would you say to them?
I would say, definitely there are resources that you can draw upon, and there is help and support out there. And again, there's a lot of really great help and support out there that will respect where you're at with things, and nobody's going to force you to do anything that you don't want to do on that end. Confidentiality is a really big thing, so if it's not something that you're ready to report or leave or whatever, it's totally fine. You'll be welcomed with open arms. You can always call the shelter and they can direct you to one of our outreach staff. You can always connect with just different agencies within the community. Just look up I think the number that you mentioned at the beginning of all this as well. And it is completely confidential, so you don't need to worry about having the fear that it's going to be exposed or anything like that.
Where can people access information and support for Youth Haven services in the community?
So you can definitely just go online, youthhaven.ca, and all of our contact information for our different programs are on there. Just connect directly with the shelter if you want. My number's on there as well for outreach services. We also have actually some exciting news. We're in the works of getting a van so that we can provide services more so on the street as well for anybody that might be experiencing any youth in the area. Just another way that we can help support and provide support and advocacy to folks who might be struggling with this matter.
Well, Laura, thank you so much to you and your team at Youth Haven for the valuable and impactful work that you're doing to address youth homelessness and sex trafficking in our community. If you are tuning into today's program and you need information and support related to human trafficking, please call the Human Trafficking Hotline number at 1-833-900-1010. If you're in a situation of immediate danger and it's safe to do so, please call 911. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Freedom Fighters Code Gray, and we hope you tune in next time.